Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Story Corner Adventures. Today we are going to be reading the first half of Chapter 8 of The Wheel on the School by Meindert Dejong. Chapter 8 is called Lena and the Upturned Boat. Now we did see Lena briefly in Chapter 7 when she and Auke were walking along parallel routes. You might recall that she had one particularly big fear as she was going along. Do you remember what that was? Right, it was dogs. And she was singing at the top of her lungs to try and make sure that the dogs wouldn't be surprised by her as she came up along there. Let's see how well that works for her. Chapter 8, Lena and the Upturned Boat. The third little side road that Lena went down was the worst. She'd gone singing down the other two lanes to let the people, and especially the watchdogs, know that someone was approaching. Luckily, there had been someone at each house to hush the awful growlings of the watchdogs. The people on those back farms had seemed only too pleased to have a young girl come visiting them. They'd exclaimed and clucked sympathetically when Lena explained the wagon wheel on the school for Stork's project. Everybody had thought it the nicest idea. "Shora lies so bare and naked against its dike," one woman had said. "It sure could stand some storks to warm it up." But nobody had had a wheel to spare. "But, dearie," the woman had said, "if we had a spare wheel, you could be sure it would be on our own lonely roof. Every day I see the storks flying over, I wish I had a wheel. It's so quiet here, and storks are such company." The third dirt road seemed to have only one farmhouse, which was at its very end. There didn't seem to be a soul around. Nothing stirred in the farmyard except some chickens and a goose under a wagon. Lena wished now she'd first run to the dike before going down this road. She'd wished she'd come singing, but she'd been thinking about what all the nice people had said on the farms on the other two roads. Here, in that awful silence, was nothing but a goose and some chickens under a wagon at the end of a short drive that led into the farmyard. Lena took one step into the lane. Up in the wagon rose an enormous dog. All of a sudden, there he stood, growling and barking, with the growls running under the quick, short barks, the growling never stopping. Lena stood, frozen, where she'd stopped. The deep growling seemed to run along the ground at her. Her spine turned cold. She couldn't see whether the dog was tied in the wagon. What if he'd come in one leap from the wagon? What then? Nothing stirred, not a thing. Lena did not know what to do. If she turned and ran, as all her quaking body wanted to do, the dog might come tearing after her. Now at least he only watched her with hard eyes and warned her away with his awful hoarse growling. A desperate plan came to Lena. She began singing at the dog. She didn't know what else to do. It came out queer and quavery, but she sang. She forced herself to sing louder. It had to sound as if she were coming on. She sang at the dog with all her might. The surprised dog stayed on the wagon, but his ears flew erect at the shrill sound of the words that Lena sang at him. His growling had stopped. He uttered one bewildered bark, then stood and stared in confusion, his ears pricked high. It encouraged Lena. She sang and sang, and as she sang, she backed away. Any old song, any words. The dog couldn't know if they were right or wrong. She didn't herself. Then, at last, a hedgerow along the road hid the dog from sight for a moment. Lena turned and fled. She kept singing wildly and looking over her shoulder. The dog was not following her. For all that, Lena shouted her song all the way back to the dike and up the dike. On the high dike, she felt safe. She dropped in a panting heap on top of the dike. Now, across the fields, she could see the dog. He was still on the wagon. He had not moved except to turn his body from the lane toward the dike. His hard eyes seemed still to look at her. Lena shuddered. Lena knew she could never nerve herself to go down another lane to another farmhouse. Never. Her throat felt scratchy and raw from her hard singing. She never wanted to sing that song again either, whatever it had been. All she knew was that she felt sweetly safe here on the dike. Nothing could take you by surprise. You could see anything coming. She looked away from the dog and out over the quiet sea behind the dike. The tide was out. The water shimmered in the far distance, but below the dike, the sea bottom stretched hard and dry in the ebb tide. With loud, alarmed squawks, a heron flew up from the dry sea. It fluttered awkwardly, then came to rest on an old upturned boat lying far out from the dike. The heron stood silhouetted against the high blue sky and the faraway blue of the water. It preened its feathers. A heron wasn't a stork, but Lena stared, fascinated at the lone bird on the lonely, forsaken boat. Teacher had said to look where a wheel couldn't possibly be. Well, a wheel couldn't possibly be in a boat, especially not under a stranded, overturned boat that had been lying there upside down for years. It had been lying there as long as history. A boat must certainly be the last place for a wagon wheel, but in such places, teacher had said, the unexpected could happen, could come up to surprise you. And there were no dogs in the sea. Slowly, Lena crossed the dry strand, skirting the few puddles left in hollow places from the last flood tide. Even as quietly as Lena came, the heron heard her. With a loud, disagreeable squawk, it flapped up and flew away over the dike. Lena was alone in the silent, dry stretches of the mysterious sea. Before her loomed the dark old boat. So, based on the description we have in the book, this is my picture of the boat as we see it, without the heron, of course. It was difficult to know how to climb to the top of the high, round-bottom fishing boat. Why she wanted to get on the boat, Lena didn't exactly know, except that now she was here, it seemed she had to do something. She couldn't just walk around it and walk back to sit on the dike. The whole boat looked slippery and slimy with seaweeds and sea scum. It was crusted all over with strange, rotted growths. Big crabs scurried under the boat. It was so still here, Lena could hear the scuttling, clicking movements of the hard-shell crabs. Snails and other slow, slimy sea animals clung and moved everywhere among the weeds and rotted wood. Lena walked around the boat once again. There was only one way to get up it. An old anchor chain still hung at the stern. It was as coated and slimy as all the rest. If she clung to the chain and pulled herself up by it, she could sort of walk up the rounded stern, if she took her wooden shoes off. Lena considered. She really should take her socks and stockings off too, but the thought of climbing the crusted boat with her bare toes among the slime and scum and moving things gave her cold horror. She'd just take her shoes off. But when she set her shoes on the dry sea bottom, they looked so tiny and helpless and out of place in the big sea that Lena felt wretched. She couldn't leave them behind. On sudden impulse, Lena pulled the ribbon out of her hair, strung it through 2 holes in the sides of her wooden shoes, and hung the shoes around her neck by the ribbon. Then, shutting her eyes tight, she grabbed the coated chain and, bracing her feet flat against the stern of the boat, hoisted herself up. It was far easier than she had expected. Lena was on the boat. She stood surprised and pleased. She looked about her proudly, wishing that somebody could have seen her. Yella thought only boys could climb and jump. If it wasn't for skirts and dresses, she thought she could outclimb big heavy Yella any old day. Oh, but it was quiet here. She wished now the heron had stayed. Lena hurriedly undid the ribbon from her shoes and put them back on. She left the ribbon around her neck. Her hands were too dirty for her to put the ribbon back in her hair. She immediately felt much better with her shoes on. She moved carefully forward, feeling her way over the slippery boat bottom among the tiny, scurrying animal insect things. There was a hole in the boat. A square hole had been cut into the bottom of the upside-down boat. But whatever for? Lena edged carefully toward the yawning hole, dropped to her knees, and queasily peered down. There was utter darkness and silence below, except for the faint, small sounds of crab scuttlings. Gradually, Lena's eyes became used to the darkness. Suddenly, she thrust herself deep into the hole, head and shoulders, her eyes trying to pierce the darkness, trying to make sure. It wasn't. It couldn't be. It was a wheel. Lena pulled her head out of the hole and glanced about her, blinking in the sunlight. Her mouth was partly open as if to shout the news to someone. But there was no one. And now in the stillness and sunlight, she couldn't believe it herself anymore. She must have imagined it in the darkness. Once more she plunged head and shoulders into the hole and hung down as far as she dared. It was so. It was a wheel. It was all but swallowed up in sea silt, but she could see part of a spoke, a little section of rim, and the big hub jutting up out of the silt. A wagon wheel was under an old, forgotten, turned-up boat. It couldn't be, but it was. Lena jumped to her feet. She danced a little dance all around the hole, forgetful of slime and slipperiness. She sang a little song in the stillness of sea, danced and sang. It seemed to be the same song she had sung to the watchdog. It still had no meaning. It still made no sense. But now it was happy. The song stopped abruptly in Lena's mouth. She stood still. Someone was watching her from the dike. It was old Dua, and this was old Dua's boat, Lena knew. But she hardly knew old Dua. Dua lived in Shora, but you seldom saw him, because every day old Dua took long walks along the dike, as far even as the village of Ternad. It took him all day, but the next day he would do it over again. Old Dua was 93. Now Dua was shouting at her from the dike, but Lena on the boat couldn't understand his hoarse old voice. "What did you say?" Lena called across the dry stretch of sea bottom. And then each word came slowly to her. Dua was shouting them one by one. "Little girl, why were you dancing on my boat?" "I found a wheel! I found a wheel!" Lena cried back at him. "Oh, sure, but that's been there some 80 years. It overwhelmed Lena. She had to sit down. Imagine it! And Dua had shouted it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A wheel in a boat for 80 years. And all the time old Dua had known. And all the time through the search by the whole school, anyone could have gone up to him and said, Dua, where can I find a wheel? And he would have replied, oh, under my boat. But who would have thought of asking Dua? Dua was almost 100 years old. 1,000 questions seemed to bubble up in Lena. 1,000 things she absolutely had to know about the wheel in the boat and about the hole. Why had they cut a hole in a boat? And everything and every amazing thing. Lena jumped to her feet. But you couldn't shout questions across such a distance. In her excitement, with her eyes fixed on Dua and tingling to know, Lena ran down the rounded side of the boat and jumped to the packed sea bottom. She landed hard on hands and feet. One wooden shoe had made a splitting sound. But there was no time to think about that now. Lena picked herself up and raced across the sea bottom to the dike. But when at last she stood before old Dua on the dike, she was too breathless for questions. Just why, the old man wanted to know, would a little girl be dancing on top of a boat because of a wagon wheel? Fortunately, he now noticed Lena's split shoe. It gave Lena a chance to catch her breath. Better carry that shoe in your hand, Dua said. We'll go to my house and I'll staple a little fine wire over the vamp. It'll be good as new, if you don't jump from boats. But why were you doing that little dance there? You've got me as curious and inquisitive as old grandmother Sybil. When Lena had her breath back, she explained why they wanted a wheel in Shora. She hurried to get it over with so she could ask Dua why there was a wheel under a boat and why it seemed the most natural thing to him, when really it was a miracle and a wonder. So you need that wheel for storks, Dua said. Well. But that square hole isn't nearly big enough to pull the wheel through, Lena told him. No, of course not, Dua said. I cut it just big enough to pull a man through, and not an inch bigger. Not an inch. A man? My father, Dua said. And that was my father's wagon wheel you saw. It saved his life. But Dua! Lena exploded. But old Dua shook his head and pointed out to sea. A group of storks came winging out from sea, from far away near the islands. For a while they headed straight for Shora, straight toward Dua and Lena, but near the old boat they swerved and flapped rapidly out of sight in the direction of Ness. There must have been 20, Lena said, awed. Nope, exactly 12, Dua said. But that isn't the point. If the storks are flying in flocks now, and that wheel's got to be out of the boat, we can't stand here talking. Tomorrow's Sunday, so there are no days to waste. The tide is soon due in from the sea, so there are no hours to waste. Besides all that, there's a storm brewing far back of the islands. Lena looked all around at the sunshiny blue sky over the distant blue sea, then looked back at the old man in complete unbelief. Oh yes, that storm's coming, Dua said. Oh, it isn't a matter of hours, it won't come in a minute. But it's going to be such a storm that the tide won't leave the dike again for days on end. So this is our last chance to get near the boat. You see, little girl, we've no time to waste, and we'd better talk as we walk. But where are we going? What will we do? Lena said anxiously. We'll do what I did before over 80 years ago. We'll go to my house to get my saw, and it's the same saw I used to cut my father out. Then we'll hurry back and cut the hole big enough to pull the wheel out. Old Dua, aided by his stout cane, strode along the dike so fast that Lena, hobbling on one shoe, had all she could do to keep up with him. She stumbled along in a daze, bewildered and seething with more and more questions. Lena looked eagerly up at the old man a few times, then she burst out with it. Dua, I've got to know why there was a wheel in a boat, or I'll explode. Dua grinned. "That's easy," he said calmly, never slackening his long stride. "You see, my father was a fisherman, just like I was, and just as his father was before him. But all his life he was plagued by seasickness. He'd be sick all the weeks out on the sea and until he got back home again. He hated the sea, but it brought him his living. He was a fisherman like his father before him, so what could he do? Grub on the land? No. But do you know what he did? He put that wagon wheel on his boat. What belongs more with the solid, steady land than a wagon wheel? Nothing. It's reasonable, isn't it?" "Yes," Lena said in a small voice, picturing the seasick man, seasick all his life. "Oh, yes, but then how did the wagon wheel save him?" "There was the big storm. The fishing fleet didn't come back. It was a swift storm. It fell down on the fleet, and there was no running away from it or out before it. Not a boat came back. I was a little boy then in Shora. A week after the storm, the tides brought in my father's boat, the only boat from the Shora fleet that ever came back. But it came back upside down. It's stranded just about where it's lying now. Nothing could have lived in an overturned boat through such a week-long storm. The whole village was in sorrow. Not a fisherman had come back. And there lay the boat, like a big tomb. Nobody went near it. I was a little boy, about as old as you are now. I used to go out on the dike and stare at the boat and cry all by myself. Every day, a little helpless, lonely boy. One day I got queer thoughts. I began dreaming things, imagining things, because it was too awful just staring at the boat that had been my father's tomb. I made up a story for myself, that my father was still in the boat, under the boat, but alive. It wasn't his tomb. Oh, it was foolish and wild, but it was so lonely when I cried there every day. Oh, it was impossible. But it was so, wasn't it? Lena said urgently. Because it was so impossibly impossible, it was so. The old man looked at her. Precisely, he said, as if he were talking to a grown-up. Impossibly impossible, but exactly, he said. Little girl, how did you ever think of it? That's the way I wish I could have explained it, because that's the way I thought of it as a child. But I had no words. Our teacher told us, Lena started to explain, but the old man was not listening. I went out to the boat, he said softly. The tide was out, the boat lay high, and there I stood beside the looming boat in the quiet sea. And I was scared because this was my father's boat, and my father was gone. I couldn't believe my dreams out there in the sea. But just the same, I laid my ear against the side of the boat, and I listened a hard time. I thought I heard a faint tapping. Oh, hardly louder than the noises of the hard-shell crabs. Then I was sure, and I yelled, "Dad! Dad!" I screamed. "Just wait! I'm coming back! Dad, I'm coming back to get you!" As if he hadn't been waiting there for days. I think I kept yelling and screaming, in between crying, all the way to Shora. I yelled down the street. Nobody would believe me. And my poor mother said, "No, Dua, no, your father is gone. Hush, boy." Oh, I couldn't stop to explain. Everybody thought I was crazy. You don't know the awful, dreadful hurry. I grabbed an axe and a saw. I ran all the way back alone. I was little, but I was strong and I was excited. I chopped a hole in the bottom of the overturned boat, and when it was big enough to push a saw through, I sawed and sawed, and every once in a while I'd have to stop and yell, "Dad, Dad," through the hole, and he answered me in a weak whisper of a voice, and then I'd saw like a maniac again. At last the hole was cut, and I could push myself in. There was my father right below me, there on the wheel. The wheel was leaning against the side of the boat. With his last strength, my father had climbed to the hub to be as close to me as possible while I saw it, to be within reach. I leaned in, I grabbed him under the arms, I lifted him out. I was small, but I was strong. Right then I could have lifted the church and the tower. Too, my father was just a light skeleton. Lena was crying a little as she hobbled beside the old man. He was striding so fast in his excitement of living it all over again, he was almost running. It was sweet to cry about it a little, because it had happened more than 80 years ago and was a miracle and a wonder. Know how we lived under that boat all those days? The old man almost shouted. By climbing to the top of the wheel whenever the tide came in, so as to keep his head above water. The boat hadn't mired so deep in the sea silt then. The tide didn't flow over it the way it does now. Know what he ate? Candles. Pieces of candle that they'd had in the boat came floating around him in the flood tides. Know what he drank? Fish and crabs. He'd chew the juices out of them for a little water and spit the salty raw flesh out again. But he was a skeleton. And there I stood on top of that boat, a boy with his father. I was almost crazy with excitement. And then, just the way you did, I ran down the side of the boat carrying my father. We landed in a heap, but I picked him up. I ran with him over the dry sea bottom and over the dike to shore. I kicked the door open and I yelled, "Mom, here's my dad!" And my mother fainted. What a day. What a great day. Together they strode along the dike, and Lena looked up at the old man in wonder. Now I'm doing it again, old Dua said suddenly. Almost a century later, I'm doing it again, running home for the same saw. I'm going to do it again, cut a hole, this time for my father's wagon wheel. And it's going on the school. You know, little girl, that is wonderful and that is right. The wheel on the school as a sort of monument to my father who was saved by that wheel. Oh, Lena gasped. Oh, yes, Dua, yes. But we're going to need help to lift that waterlogged wheel out of the silt and up through the hole. Won't it be rotten? Lena asked anxiously. After almost a century? It seemed such endless ages. It'll be as sound as the day it landed there. Under the water and in the moist silt, it would be almost eternal. Wood under salt water doesn't rot. Then I'm going to run and tell the teacher, Lena said. He'll ring the school bell and all the boys will come. They can help us. But it'll take a while. They're all over the countryside. Fine, the old man said. I'll get the saw and a shovel. We can start making the hole bigger and dig the wheel out of the silt while they come in from the country. Tell your teacher everybody's to hurry. The tide will soon be in. Here, give me that wooden shoe so I can fix it. No, better give me both. Then you can run faster and get to that school. Lena hastily handed the old man both her wooden shoes and dashed off. Far behind her, she could hear the old man's heavy cane pounding the brick in his fierce stride. We're going to stop here for now and take a little bit of a break. In the meantime, I want you to pay attention in the next section to find out what things we can't explain by what we already know about what the boys have been doing while Lena's been out on the dike. Talk to you later. Bye-bye now.